Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. This is the Doing Virtue podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Criste, and tonight I'm joined by both of my co-hosts, Brian Hicks and LaRochelle. We're all in studio, and tonight we have kind of an interesting situation, unprecedented for the Doing Virtue podcast. We have a return guest. Someone was bold enough to come back. We don't know why, but they did agree. And our guest tonight is the beloved Dr. Daniel McInerny, and we're excited to have him on. Thanks for being here.
Oh, it's a thrill to be back. I feel like I'm the Steve Martin of the Doing Virtue podcast because he's done Saturday Night Live more than any other guest.
I did not think about that.
I wouldn't have thought of that either,
but that's going to be one of the keywords
Steve Martin
I'll use in
is
the title.
on the podcast.
Steve Martin
We had Steve Martin
of the podcast.
back when SNL was good.
Yeah, right. True.
Yeah, so tonight we are drinking a little Angel's Envy.
Fantastic.
It is a finished rye. It's finished in Caribbean rum casks. This was a present from my father-in-law and my wife for my birthday, which was this past weekend. Beautiful. And I had a little bit on Sunday.
A little bit.
Well, it wasn't just me, but yeah, I had several good pours, and then we're going to enjoy it tonight. And I think Mark has a couple of little tidbits
on
us.
top of your Caribbean port casks. That also says ruby port casks.
I think there's another
what
one.
What does ruby mean? Just
ruby
gonna ask.
casks?
Yeah, ruby port casks. What would that mean? I'm not asking you to.
I don't know.
I think it would just be red, maybe.
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure. It's is that 50 proof? Because this one is 50 proof. Right?
No, this one is.
Oh, then this is
100 proof. This 50% alcohol.
Sorry, 50%, 100.
But yeah,
100
yeah. So it's a stronger one.
It has hints of oak, dried berries, raisins, peanuts, baking spices, and a tad biscuity. I don't know. Biscuity.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right.
This
is Doing Virtue,
a Catholic podcast.
Where virtue is what we do.
Cheers.
Thanks for having me back, gentlemen.
Cool.
Our pleasure.
This is a treat.
I thought you had a comment on the taste.
Yeah. It's complex yet unanticipated.
There it is.
All right.
We've thought about making one of our hashtags just across the board, simple yet precocious. Yeah, because it just kind of explains
everything.
Humans in a way, but also whiskey.
I love it.
This is good.
Yeah, it's good. It's surprisingly smooth for a rye. Number one, those tend to be a little harsher.
Sweet. Like the initial taste is pretty sweet,
and it is. I think it's really sweet because of the rum cask, probably. Wow. But yeah, it's the first time I tasted it, I was expecting it to be a lot more peppery, and kind of harsh because that's what ryes tend to be, and it was like really sweet. Almost sweet enough. I feel like this would actually be really good in an old fashioned because it already has the sweetness, so you wouldn't even have to add that much simple syrup. And it's 100 proof, so even if the ice watered it down a little bit, it would still kick pretty well.
Yeah. And it is kind of funny too. It on the nose, I was like, "Oh, my nose, it's on fire!" Before I drank it, and then I drank it, and now it smells super sweet.
Yeah,
it's kind of it's pretty interesting.
No, it's good. I would recommend. I've had one other Angel's Envy, but I haven't had any of their ryes, so it's a treat. The bottle, it's funny. I actually had planned buying one of these bottles when we have Father Pollard on at some point, because we're going to talk about angelology. And this is Angel's Envy, and on the back there's a little like decal that are angel wings. That's okay. We'll figure out something else, or have one of the other bottles. Boom. So tonight we are having Dr. McInerny back on for several reasons, but first and foremost, since we already know everything there is to know about his background and nothing more could be said, we want to talk about his new book, which is entitled Beauty and Imagination, a philosophical reflection on the arts. And he has several reviews that are, I would say, fairly positive. But by far the best one is from Peter Criste, who said that it is literally the best book on beauty that he has ever read, which is quite the statement from Peter Criste. And so we'll start off with that. What Did you reach out to Peter Criste? Is this a publishing? Because it was with Word on Fire, correct?
Peter Criste owes me money. I think
Nice.
that's how that started. No.
Wow. Definitely want to hear about that.
No, he's a one-man marketing department. It's that single blurb has been wonderful for the book. So I am very grateful to the great Dr. Peter Criste for that. Very humbled, very flattered by that. But no, Word on Fire is the publisher. They have a division called Word on Fire Academic that they started 5 years ago or so. And I read their very first book in that line one weekend. I was sick, and it was on C.S. Lewis's The Abolition of Man by one of the great C.S. Lewis scholars, Father Michael Ward. And I just devoured this book in a weekend. It was all I could do was lay in bed and read. And I closed it, and I thought, and it was a beautiful book, had beautiful full-color photographs in the middle of it, and I thought, boy, it'd be great to publish a book in that series and have it look this good. Who knows when that was? That was probably in 20 or 21 when I had that thought. And I pitched, I think it was probably 21, and I pitched them the idea. They reacted positively right away. They run their press more like a commercial press as opposed to an academic press, or it's kind of a hybrid. Like a commercial press, they ask you to submit a proposal. So you kind of turn in this portfolio to them with sample chapters and marketing ideas and a synopsis and all of this stuff going into the portfolio. It's like an academic press in that they send it out for review to other academics. Publication didn't hinge on that. They were going to take the book, but the reviews were helpful. And so they, it just appeared June 3rd, 2024, earlier this month. And I'm delighted by the way it looks and feels even in your hand. But they're the ones who solicit what are commonly called blurbs for the back cover. And every one I'm very pleased and proud of. Not least the second one, which was written by someone you may not know. But that's, make sure. Seeing this, that's Monsignor Robert Sokolowski, who was a professor of mine in graduate school at the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C., and I think one of the great Catholic philosophers of our time, one of the great philosophers, period, of our time. And my wife Amy and I had a delightful dinner with him in D.C. just Saturday night, this past Saturday night. I hadn't seen him in a long time, just turned 90. Wow. And that was just a thrill to spend some time with him. So he wrote a very encouraging blurb, as did Tom Hibbs at Baylor and Glen Arbor at Wyoming Catholic. So it's... it's very flattering, and I just feel very supported by Word on Fire Academic. They've done a great job with the marketing in the first few weeks.
When did you start sort of writing this, or when did you sort of have the idea that you were going to turn this into like a full-scale book? Yeah,
it was probably, without looking it up, my guess, I probably pitched it to them maybe in the fall, maybe in the summer, late summer, early fall of 21.
Okay.
But I wrote, I probably had some things written, if only class notes, because a lot of these ideas I had been working on for a while. It wasn't a very cold start. But I wrote it in earnest in the summer of 22.
Okay.
And throughout the rest of that year and really all through 23, there were various rounds of revision, waiting for the peer reviews to come in, responding to those. And then the book was pretty much done in December of 23, but it still took 6 months for it to appear, simply because Word on Fire, they put on a lot of stuff. And so you kind of get in the assembly line and you wait your turn.
Okay.
So I was antsy by the time it appeared, but it was well worth the wait.
I remember, I think it was earlier this year, and I don't remember if you were on a podcast or you posted about it, but I think as soon as I saw that, I texted you and was like, we want to have you back on whenever this new book comes out. I think it's June. Let's try to do it. Because I was like, this book is going to be so awesome. And it's probably, it encapsulates and builds off of what we talked about on the first podcast.
I'm sure
before you had, I guess you had started writing it at that point, but it wasn't anywhere near being done.
Right.
So were you able to pick out the cover art or like any of the kind of design details?
That's their work. They gave me, they sent me 2 final options, and I can't even remember. It was a no-brainer in my mind, and to my wife Amy, that this was the winner. And so in that sense, I had a choice, but it was really their design team that did that. And yeah, just a great job. Love the paper. Love the font, just everything about it. It's just, they do beautiful work, and that's very fitting for a book on beauty.
I know, wouldn't that be ironic if you got the book and it really wasn't that great?
Yeah, that would not be good for marketing.
Something that popped out at me right away when I got it. Number one is I didn't realize it was going to be as big of a book, so I thought, maybe the words are bigger and it's like just bigger text.
Right.
And I looked and I was like, no, the words are a normal size. It's just a really big book. Like you compare it to the Bible and it's like,
it got a little out of hand. I didn't, it got a little out of hand. I think what made it big is the third part, maybe the fourth part, where I devote a chapter to each or many of the major arts. And I thought it was important to kind of get down to the ground and not just have the entire book be theoretical.
Sure.
And so talk about painting, talk about poetry, talk about music, cinema, theater, even a chapter at the end on popular entertainment. I just thought it was important to do that, but that meant more words. But I never thought I was writing a book that would be over 400 pages in print. I never imagined that.
Yeah. Were the initial drafts that long or longer and you cut it down? Or as you were writing, were you just like pulling in more things and it just kept kind of snowball effect, kept growing?
It's the latter, I guess. But, all I see until the very end are Word docs. So it's hard to tell when it's typeset how many actual pages it's going to be. Finally, toward the end of the process, you get a PDF of the interior design. And that's when I realized, this book is over 400.
That's so good. I mean, if you really like what you're writing and then it ends up being that long, you're like, all right, this is great. I love it.
Right. I didn't have. I might have had a word count. I usually work by word counts in my head, not by page counts. And but I just blew right by that exit.
Did you have a outline in terms of like the basic things that you wanted to go over, or did it just started adding things left and right?
I had an outline, but the outline was a living thing as I went through the process, as ideas come. And I think one chapter I split into that kind of decision. I made a decision in the middle of the process to do a dialogue. There's kind of a Platonic dialogue in the middle of it that riffs on Tolkien's short story Leaf by Niggle.
Nice.
I kind of write a sequel, kind of a playful sequel to it, or a dialogue that's kind of a sequel to it. So that idea came in the process. I was going to write the chapter on the themes discussed in that dialogue, and I was working so hard and so fast. I told myself, I just can't write another normal chapter. I have to shake this up a bit. Nice. And I thought, I guess I was just in a playful mood that day, and I thought, why don't I do this as a dialogue?
That's awesome.
That's sweet.
And
make it your own. That's awesome.
Yeah, and I just thought no one at Word on Fire was put off by that to my face. So
there's some closed door meeting. Who's this McInerny guy? Thinks he's Plato.
It's in the final draft.
I'm very happy though that's in the book.
Something I noticed, which was funny because when I looked at that, so the way that it's structured is you have part 1, part 2, interlude, and part 3. So it's got a 3-act structure, right, like many plays would have. So it's already being structured as like a drama in some sorts. Nice, and then I thought it was neat because your interlude, what it reminded me of is a lot of books that Peter Criste has written, where he'll take different characters from history or literature and put them in a room together and make them talk. Right. And I was like, this is exactly what Criste does. Like,
it's funny. I'm pretty confident in saying I was not thinking of him, but you're exactly right.
Maybe that's why it's the best book he's ever read.
Yeah, maybe that's
he's disappointed he didn't think of this first.
He thought he did write it.
Best book I've ever published. I mean, reviewed.
Wait, who is this written by?
So we don't have to go through chapter by chapter, but I'm curious, just to kind of kick things off. The first chapter is on the nature of the mimetic arts, and part 1 is the way of beauty is the way of imitation. Mm-hmm. Could you talk a little bit about why, like, what does imitation have to do with beauty, and how is that found in the various arts in different degrees?
Wow. Yeah, that's the whole book. That's the biggest idea in the book.
Sweet. That's the only question we'll ask
And
today.
That's the only question you need to ask. It's so big and complex and interesting. I'm trying to retrieve, or as Monsignor Sokolowski says in his blurb, the book reactivates an Aristotelian understanding of art. So you might remember from the core at Christendom in a literature class reading Aristotle's little text, The Poetics. And in the Poetics, Aristotle is talking mainly about what he calls poetry, which would include pretty much what we would think of as the storytelling arts with lyric poetry kind of thrown in. And then he focuses on Greek tragedy in particular as he goes. But toward the beginning of the work, he says that poetry is imitation. In his Greek, it's mimesis. We get our English word mimic from that. That understanding of art began to be challenged maybe even as early as the 16th century, maybe 17th century, certainly by the 18th century in Western Europe. Art as imitating reality began to be challenged, and a long story of how modern art came to be started from there. But let's not get into that. Let's stick with the basic Aristotelian notion. What does it mean to say that art imitates? I use the metaphor of picturing that I take from my professor, Monsignor Sokolowski. To imitate is to make a picture of some aspect of reality. And that is done literally in painting and in photography, but I would say even a novel, a poem, a film, a television show, music, they are all imitative. They are all trying to picture reality in some way so that we, the audience, can contemplate that reality in the picture. So with any kind of picture, the photographs on your phone, you have the picture itself. Let's say it's of your wife and your child. So you have the picture, but the picture it's like a window. It's pointing to the reality of your wife and child. And you are the one taking it as a picture, right? You know it as a picture. This artifact helps me enjoy and contemplate the reality that's being pictured. That is what imitation does in a nutshell, which sounds kind of harmless and uncontroversial. But for many, what I just described sounds like, oh, that's boring. You mean all the artist does is he just kind of copies reality. He just is kind of like an elaborate secretary. He's just kind of, he's putting down on the canvas or on a page. He's just putting down what he sees. That doesn't sound creative. That doesn't sound like the artist is able to express himself or herself. I'm just sort of recording. And so I am giving voice to the objection against imitation that grew, as I was saying, 17th, 18th century, and in many ways is still with us today. So to go back to the top, my book is trying to make plausible again an Aristotelian notion of art as imitation, as imitating reality. We can go deeper in that because there's more to say just on what imitation actually is. We might want to do that before we get into beauty.
Sure. I guess one quick question I had, and if this is going down a rabbit hole, just redirect. Does imitation, like, for it to be art, does imitation have to picture reality, or can it picture, like, I'm thinking of like religious art that depicts God, and God is a reality, but he's not a reality that we can necessarily see. So he's not a visible reality. I guess I should have said, does art have to depict a visible reality, or you're just saying reality as long as it exists?
Yeah, obviously not, because we have lots of religious art.
Okay.
The Sistine Chapel ceiling depicts God the Father, who no one has seen. But we see him as sort of a grand old man, with touching Adam's finger, almost touching Adam's finger. So we do depict unseen realities, but yeah, the thought is that we're going to imitate reality in some sense. One of the key distinctions I think we need to get our minds around is the distinction between a likeness and an imitation. And here's the key thought. An imitation involves a likeness, but it's always more than a likeness. So let's talk about what a likeness is. This is an example I use in the book. My wife and I own identical red Honda CR-Vs. It just so happened, years apart, when we went to the lot to buy a car, the best buy for us was a red Honda CR-V. So in our driveway are parked two cars that are very much alike. They are, except for the license plate, they're incredibly similar. Yet neither car is an imitation of the other. Right? Imitation is not the same as looking like something. However, here's the rub. An imitation needs to have an element of likeness. You need to be able to connect the picture, the image, with what is being pictured. So you're able to look at a photograph of your wife and baby, and you're able to immediately, because it is so like them, it's like how they look, there's no question that that's a picture of your wife and child. So we need some element of similarity in order to identify what is being pictured. But yet, as I said, imitation is always more than the similarity. Because if it was only similarity, then the highest and best art would be photography. And it's a great art, but I don't know of anybody who's ready to say it is the noblest and the best and the greatest art. the temptation is to say that, well, it gives us the truest likeness of what it's picturing. What more could you want? Well, imitation, again, is not just the likeness. We need something of a likeness, but we need something more. What is the more that we need? What an imitation will do, what a picture will do, is it will give us both the sensible and the intelligible forms of whatever it is we're trying to depict in a fresh way, in a way that manifests those forms in a way that's new and interesting and inspires contemplation. So think of a painted portrait of somebody that is not in any way attempting to be photorealistic. I can tell it is, take Van Gogh, for example, did many self-portraits. I can look at the self-portrait, I can tell it's Van Gogh. There's enough of a likeness for me to connect the object to the imitation, and that's important. But Van Gogh will do more than that in his use of color, in even the position of his head, the whole design, the background he uses. What he's doing is he's trying to reveal the sensible forms of how he looked physically, like he had prominent cheekbones, it seems, but also something of his character is coming out. A good portrait will do that. And that kind of picture, that level of picturing goes beyond just mere likeness. Mm-hmm. And sometimes think of a caricature. You know, so you go to the fair and someone does a caricature of you. Your nose isn't that big. Your ears aren't that big. But yet, although it's not an exact likeness, it's enough of a likeness we know it's you. Mm. But what the caricature does through exaggeration, he freshens our perception, not only of how you look, but of who you are, so that we see ourselves in a new way. And that is the real power of imitation. That's a mouthful.
It kind of reminds me a little bit of, now I don't know if you would consider like stand-up comedy an art, but how stand-up comedians will point at reality, but rather than just saying, here is everyone's experience, they say, here is everyone's experience, but then they'll describe it in a way that's overly sarcastic or so exaggerated while still remaining true enough that it's relatable, but going so far beyond what, they're describing being in traffic, and it's so over the top that it's funny, but it's funny because it's relatable, even if you haven't done that exact thing. You have the common ground of having both been in traffic and being annoyed at the same things or thinking the same things are funny.
Exactly.
And then it's like, but it's exploded. It's that view times 10, and then it makes it funny. Exactly. And it's interesting because a lot of times, especially if it's an overly sarcastic comedian, all of what they're saying is true, but the way that they're saying it is just really it's ridiculous.
Right.
And it's partially ridiculous, or it's partially funny because it's true, and then it's also funny because it's just so over the top that you're just laughing at kind of the absurdity of how over the top they're describing it.
I think that's a fabulous example. It's akin to my example of the caricature. Or think of the Jerry Seinfeld gag about. It happens to all of us. You lose a sock in the dryer. You put two socks in the washer. You put them in the dryer, and then something happens. There's only one sock at the end of the process. He has a gag with this, and in his gag, the socks become personified, and so you're hearing the voices of the sock. And it's like, and the other socks are mad at the sock who went AWOL, and it's hilarious. Okay. He is. I very much think of stand-up as an art, and I very much think there's mimesis going on there. He's certainly picturing or depicting, imaging a reality that we are all very familiar with, a very mundane one, but one that's just uncanny. We tend to lose socks in the dryer. but he, through exaggeration, the technique of personification, he twists the situation. He does not give us a photorealistic view. Another kind of comedian would. Like, doesn't that drive you crazy when you open up the dryer and you're missing a sock? And people might titter with laughter, but they won't really belly laugh because there's not enough exaggeration there. There's not enough caricature there. But someone like Seinfeld, he will really exaggerate, personify, milk the situation for all it's worth, so that we see it fresh, so that we see it new. All art of any worth is going to make something like that move.
And it's also interesting too with like obviously they have to exaggerate to make people laugh, or they're making it ridiculous, but then there are also those most comedians will either make a face too to like add to it, but then there's also I don't know if there's one comedian that I've watched pretty recently, but and he's still around, still doing stuff, but one of his, I think if you look him up on YouTube, I think they call him like the king of physical comedy. So he acts it out too, and it makes it so much more funny too. So it's even more ridiculous than just of what he's saying. And because it's personified, you can even more relate to it too.
Absolutely.
Which is really
every
cool.
punchline becomes a character.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
In making something fresh, like presenting it as fresh, how would one, let's just say you have a painter and they paint, and they have their own style and their own characteristics, and then 200 years later you have a very similar artist who has a very similar style and very similar characteristic. How would it take away from the artist that's 200 years later to say that he's not presenting something that's fresh? It's different than the art that's going on now, but it's basically almost very similar in terms of style, in terms of character, as the art 200 years ago. Is there like a characteristic that might distinguish the other from the other, I guess?
There could be. It's a really good question. Not every work of art can be original in every way. Most works of art, I think, are not terribly original. They are plugging into genre tropes, traditions, ways of doing things, and they're not aspiring to turn all that on its head. Mm-hmm. They just want to contribute to the genre or to the tradition. Most mystery writers, for example, would fall into that category. They're not trying to reinvent the genre. So if someone, even 200 years along, finds himself doing, say, what a painter did, a Picasso when he was a kid, he was kind of precocious artist. He said, I drew like Rembrandt when I was a kid. But he didn't continue to draw like Rembrandt. He wanted to push his talent in a bold new direction, and we can maybe have some questions about that direction. but he didn't want to just fall into a genre or repeat what someone else has done. There's no crime repeating what someone else has done, but I think we need art that is going to push the tradition in new ways. But that's an important point. You're extending the conversation of the tradition when you do that. You're not setting it on fire. You're not throwing it over. You're taking what has been done and you're thinking, hey, I can extend this in a new way with this technique or this approach. Let me try that. And we need that kind of art too. I don't think we need it in every instance. Obviously we don't. People are very happy reading mystery novels that are pretty much what Agatha Christie was doing 100 years ago. Right.
Or like Hallmark, people watch it because it's going to be the same result every time.
Exactly.
They know what's going to happen, and they're watching. It's to be comforted.
Yes.
So if Hallmark started like adding these gruesome murders and started adding like, you know, really comedic elements that really don't exist in Hallmark,
Right.
maybe people would still watch it, but the kind of the fan base of Hallmark wouldn't like that because they're watching it to be entertained in a similar way. It's almost like TV show, like sitcoms that you go back to.
Right.
It's like, is it actually a quality sitcom or is it just nostalgic? It's a, you know, it's predictable. I know it's going to happen, but the canned laughter makes me laugh every time. Like it's just kind of,
It's so bad it's good.
yeah, it's just, you kind of can't get away from it. So yeah,
We're
I
anticipating some themes from my last chapter on popular entertainment, because we do have to be. Everything we've said, I think, is useful, but I think we do have to be careful not to. The Hallmark movie example made me think of it. We don't want to approve of every tradition, of every use of a genre, because sometimes it's just downright silly. Or they're taking the very noble genre of the romantic comedy or the romantic story, and it becomes so predictable, so comforting. I'm not saying it's evil to enjoy that by any means, but we also need art that's not comforting. That's a point that I stress in that final chapter. We need to be challenged by art as well, and I think that's its highest and better function. But we all have our meatloaf and mashed potatoes meal of a book or a movie that just is sheer comfort.
Right.
And I think that's fine in small doses.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what do you mean by being challenged? Like, so, because,
I mean, it should put you to the question, say, in the way that a Platonic dialogue puts you to the question, or a good work of philosophy. It should interrogate you, your understanding of life and of life's meaning, of what is good, of what is evil, of what suffering means, of every aspect of the good life. It should, not that you need to throw out ideas, but it should at least challenge you to kind of confirm ideas that you do hold, at least that, to see them afresh, to realize their implications. So, if you don't mind an example, there is a movie, I think I mentioned it in the book, came out, I think as I was working on it, came out in 21 or so, went straight to streaming, starring Anthony Hopkins, and it's called The Father, and I highly recommend it. I think it was on Amazon. And it's a story of an elderly man living in London, a widower being cared for by his adult daughter, and he's falling into dementia. And it is, I think, the most vivid portrayal of dementia I have ever seen. I'm going to spoil a little bit of it for you. You don't realize until you're well into the movie that a lot of the scenes you are watching are not real, but they're the projection of his dementia. You're seeing things that he's imagining, and it takes you a while to be able to distinguish what in the movie is real and what is not. So it's crafted very, very cleverly. So my wife and I watched that movie, and it ends, and you're moved by it. I was moved by that movie more than most movies I watch. It's a very somber movie, but I had the experience that Aristotle describes in the Poetics. When we see a tragedy, we feel cleansed. I feel kind of like a shower has washed through me. I see reality clearer, fresher. I've been challenged to see what old age can be for what it really is, at least sometimes, and it ain't pretty. But life is like that. There's no avoiding it. That's an example of what I mean by being challenged by a movie. It didn't cause me to kind of throw out any of my moral principles. It's not that kind of challenge, though I guess a story can do that too. It was more challenging my, I don't know, complacency about human life and what it means to get older. It's like you can see that, as they say, old age can be a shipwreck. It can be nasty, and but it's cleansing to see that, because it's true, and the truth is always cleansing.
If I could throw out a little bit of an example as well. Please. I was in Europe in April, and we went to Naples, and in one church, we went in, and I was just looking at all the different side altars and whatnot, and one of them had this painting that just really struck me, and I would say challenged me, because it is a portrayal of the martyrdom of however many number of saints. I took a picture of it. I don't remember the name of the saint, but the leader sort of all the martyrs was beheaded first, and sort of the way that it's portrayed is there are, so many bodies that are all beheaded, and one of them is on the chopping block ready to be martyred, and then just standing in like the right side of the painting is the leader who's already been beheaded, but the legend is that after he got beheaded, he just stood up. The body stood up, and you have, I think it's portraying Muslims who are trying to knock him over with like a rope or just pushing him, and it struck me to the point challenging faith in just terms of this man. The legend goes that like he stood up because his faith was like a stone wall that it couldn't be knocked over, and that was sort of like, as you were talking about being challenged in art, it really struck me, as in this martyr had this crazy faith that we should all strive to have, and it just calls into question: am I doing enough? Are we doing enough?
There you go.
What's going on?
That's a beautiful example.
It was awesome.
That's wonderful.
So
that's wonderful.
So I guess correct me if I'm wrong. You're saying by challenge, you're not saying that, like a film, it doesn't have to be like thought provoking necessarily. It doesn't need to move you to tears necessarily, but it does need to have. And I guess it's kind of it's almost like the what is it called, the beard theory, right? Where you don't really know where. If someone's growing facial hair, you can't really say where the beard has started. But after a while, it's like, okay, clearly there's a beard. Right. It's almost something, it seems to be on that spectrum of, did this art, like maybe there's a painting and it just doesn't do anything for you. Okay, maybe it's not challenging you. But maybe there's a painting where you're like, well, I like aspects of it, and it made me think a little bit. So is that art? Or is it, so it almost seems like you can't necessarily pin it as this is what it means to be challenged, but you sort of know it when you see it in different kind of varying modes.
Yeah. Right.
I don't know if that's a good way of explaining it, but...
Yeah, I would just add at the end, there's a spectrum. There's a spectrum of being challenged.
Okay.
So, if I watch, let's say I'm enjoying Jerry Seinfeld do the sock in the dryer gag. That's not going to challenge me. It's not going to, I mean, it does reveal a truth, but not a truth that's really, it's not deep. And he would be the first to admit that. Yeah. He's an interesting guy, by the way, if you've seen his recent interviews of him.
And his commencement speech at Duke.
Yes.
I thought that was really, I actually didn't watch the whole thing, but one of the things he said was like, you have to be able to keep your sense of humor. Yeah. And the reason that our culture today is like, especially the youth, the reason they're struggling so much is that everything is a big deal, and some things just aren't a big deal, and you have to be okay with just saying, oh, that's kind of funny, and just moving on with your life, and not being like, okay, assemble for a protest that, someone parked on the wrong side of whatever. And I was like, that actually is, as a huge, coming from a big liberal and probably someone who's never voted for Catholic policy in his life, coming out and saying, yeah, you should have a sense of humor and like don't take yourself seriously. And,
he's called out kind of woke culture, directly by name. I even saw him in a clip the other day. He used the word leftist. So he's pretty mad. And it's kind of interesting to see Jerry Seinfeld, who I imagine still at the end of the day is a pretty kind of liberal progressive guy, realizing that comedy is under attack. So they're messing with his with his whole being, and he doesn't like it. But Jerry Seinfeld, one thing I like about him is he describes what he does as light entertainment. It's not meant to challenge you at your existential core. But there's a spectrum. And I think a film like The Father or The Painting will challenge you more at the very core of your being. Or Shakespeare's Hamlet or Homer or Dante might challenge you in that way. Agatha Christie won't challenge you in that way. She'll kind of more confirm the goodness of justice. We got the guy who did it. We're putting him away. Poirot did it again. All is right with the world. It doesn't kind of claw at my innards in the way that The Father does or the way that Hamlet does.
Do you think that's why Flannery O'Connor in many ways is both maybe unappreciated but also misunderstood, because people read it and are like, well, that was tragic. That wasn't it was supposed to be a short story to read to my kids. Why is everyone dead in a ditch? Like,
yes.
But then you read it and you're like, but the point is it's not trying to be soothing. It's not trying to say
Exactly.
Like, there's plenty of authors who will tell you the goodness and beauty of God's creation and all this stuff, but what she's trying to do is say, like, here's the chaos.
Right.
And then I don't even think a lot of times she gives you a solution. She's just saying, here's the chaos. And then I think as a Catholic, you compare that with, okay, chaos, suffering, and you can kind of put it in the right context. But I think that,
Love that. Yeah.
people don't really know how to deal with it. They're just like, why is everything just tragic and all over the place? And maybe it's thought-provoking, but I don't know why. Like
Right.
I feel like there's a lot of people that want to understand Flannery O'Connor and want to enjoy her, but just don't. And I'm in that category. I'm like, I'll read it and be like, I don't understand this,
She's tough.
but I think it's good.
She's tough. She's a great example for what we're talking about, though, because I think her biggest theme, it's kind of like what I was saying with The Father. For her, what she wants to show is we're a world in desperate need of grace, but the paradoxical thing is grace often comes to us in very violent and upsetting, deadly ways. And that's not soothing to us as Christians. We want our grace to come kind of easily and sweetly. But I think she's more realistic about how God works, at least a lot of the time. And it's bracing, it's cleansing, it's fresh. It feels true when I read her work.
It seems like in a world of like microaggressions, it seems like especially for Catholics, this isn't necessarily applicable to everyone, but we've really forgot what martyrdom is. Like we forgot, because the world is so comfortable, martyrdom for us is the Wi-Fi not working or a text not going through. And while those are annoying and we have the technology for that not to be a problem, that like those things end up being the biggest problem.
Yep.
But like, I feel like none of us would know how to react, myself included. None of us would know how to react if people came to town and just started killing Catholics or Christians or anyone. Like even if it wasn't religion specific, if there was just a mass like slaughter going on.
Yep.
I don't think any of us would know how to deal with it, just like mentally, not even from a place of faith.
That's so true. I think about that same thought a lot. I think what must make it so hard for people maybe to respond to the Christian message is we're just so comfortable. It's like we're just so, our homes are comfortable, our cars are comfortable, our clothes are comfortable. The culture is relatively peaceful. It's we're as comfortable as any human beings have ever been in the history of the planet. Faith wants to challenge us though, and it's just so easy to slough it off and say, like the people in Athens, we'll listen to you another day.
Yeah. While we were talking about like movies that challenge you, I was trying to think like what is the last like really good movie that I've watched, and not just enjoyable, because there's plenty of enjoyable movies. And the first one that came to mind was The King's Speech. I don't know if you've seen that.
Oh, it's one of my favorites.
And I remember watching that, and that was the first time in like maybe a year or two where I was like, that was just a good movie. Like I could critique parts of it. I could critique maybe like part of the soundtrack or this or that, but from an overall perspective, it was just like, wow.
Yeah.
Like, that is incredible. Like, the story you told, the actors, the way that everything, and it was just showing a leader who had a speech impediment. Like,
Right.
that's the plot of the entire story.
Yep.
But what they do with that, I was just like, that was like mind-boggling.
Right.
How much like detail and story was in that.
I
Yeah.
agree. That's one of my actually favorite movies, especially of the last maybe 10, 15 years. That would be in my top 5 movies. And what's nice is they expand. I mean, the theme goes beyond his speech impediment a little bit. It's about a man trying to find his voice. So the speech impediment is kind of a metaphor for a man who just doesn't have the courage to speak his own mind. And he learns how to overcome the speech impediment, but he also learns how to speak his mind. And that's, it's a beautiful movie.
It really is.
Yeah.
We got a little on the challenging question. How do we get back to?
Well, I guess the good way to loop back into this is you talk about how art is about story.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, like, what does that look like? Because I think in a movie or in a book that can be pretty evident. Like, you have a protagonist, you have an antagonist, you have they need to get into a conflict, there needs to be a resolution. But how does that apply to other works of art? Like, what is story? What is that?
Right. Yeah, you've hit upon the claim I make in the book that is the least intuitive, maybe. Because yes, exactly. If we're talking about a novel, a film, a television series, and I say it's a story, you get it. But if I say a sculpture is a story, if I say a Van Gogh self-portrait is a story, if I say music is a story, including music without lyrics, including music that's not part of a musical, so there's no background story. So, Mozart's 40th Symphony, it's just pure sound. To call all that story is more radical. But what I'm reflecting on there, it goes back to Aristotle's Poetics. He says, what do we imitate? He talks about imitation in the way we've talked about, but then he says, what is it that we're imitating, even in poetry? And he uses a word, it's a participle that simply means human beings doing stuff. Human beings acting. Human beings acting, human action. Well, that connects us back to Aristotle's great book on ethics, the Nicomachean Ethics, which is all about human action. And in that book, we learn that human action is always aimed at the good and ultimately aimed at the highest and best good, which is happiness. So if art is imitating men in action, it's imitating human beings working out their happiness, seeking happiness, maybe finding it, maybe failing to find it. The Father, the movie that I mentioned earlier, is a tragedy because we have somebody who fails to find happiness, who struggles to find some peace, but it really ends tragically. And some human lives end that way, so it's bracing. Okay, but let's get to the harder cases. Let's move beyond literal stories. Let's talk about a self-portrait. And again, I'm depending on thoughts here from my teacher, Monsignor Robert Sokolowski. Anybody who wants to do a deeper dive on this, I encourage you to read an essay of his called Visual Intelligence in Painting. And if you're interested, I can get you a copy of it. It's a brilliant essay. I teach it in my art and beauty class at Christendom. I probably read it once a year just to touch base with its ideas because it's about painting, but it's about more than painting. Even a self-portrait where you have Van Gogh or whoever it is just kind of sitting there. They're still. Doesn't seem like there's any action going on. Doesn't seem like they're in pursuit of anything. It's just a face on a canvas. Sokolowski argues, and I agree, that even someone's face is what he calls, I think he's quoting someone else, an essay at beatitude. I love that phrase. It's an essay from the French word means an attempt. So face is an attempt. It shows us someone's attempt at beatitude. It shows us kind of sums up their life in a way. I think it might have been the philosopher Wittgenstein who said, at 50, every man has the face he deserves. Which is to say, your character, your experiences, the summation of your experience of life is in a sense right here by the age of 50, so he says. But I think it's true of really any portrait of anyone at any age. You're seeing not just what they look like. It's not just about a similarity. Oh yeah, that looks like Vincent van Gogh. But you're seeing, oh, that's what life was for him. And it's not articulate in words. It doesn't spell it out for you. You have to intuit it by looking at the painted forms that, for example, at least in his later self-portraits, this was not a happy man. This is life had been tough on this man. You can see it in his eyes. You can see it in the way he painted himself. There's a story there, is what I'm saying. It doesn't have a 3-act structure, doesn't have subplots, but we're seeing how a story turned out, at least on the day the portrait was painted. That's actually the easy case. Once we get into sculpture and especially music, my case gets harder. But I don't know if that much makes sense.
Well, yeah, that does.
So the claim is that every work of art is a story. It's telling the story of the human quest for happiness.
Do you think that it'd be true to say in the work of art, when you are viewing it, if you're able to tell more of the story, or I guess perceive more of the story, that's kind of how it ranks as a work of art? So if you look at this painting and you see, oh, it looks like they walked from there and the wind is blowing, and you're able to see all the details that the artist intended, that means it's a good work of art, or not? Because it seems like you could have a really simple work of art where there's not much going on and it still could be a story, but maybe you just can't. I think that's kind of the argument with modern art is, well, you just don't know what you're looking for. It's a red dot, but you're not educated enough to figure this out. And I think a good counter argument is, no, there's no story. Like there's nothing going on here. It's not on you as the viewer. It's the artist this isn't art, or if it is, it's not very good.
Or it's outside the mimetic tradition. And I think that's what you're seeing in sort of the painting of the red dot is we have artists, and this is what began, maybe especially in the 18th century and picked up great steam in the 20th, was we don't want anything to do with imitation anymore. So the artist will say, I'm not trying to picture. Or some might say, I'm thinking of Jackson Pollock, the action painter, who just sort of, sprayed paint at the canvas. Nonetheless, one of his canvases, which is just swirls of dripped paint, is entitled Autumn Rhythm Number 30. And I asked my students, if we took that placard away, would you know it had anything to do with autumn? And you would not know. But somehow in calling it that, he was still, I think, grasping at something mimetic. This is at least how autumn makes him feel. So that's sort of hanging on by a fingernail to the mimetic tradition. But there are other artists who just want to just throw it away completely. I'm just going to take a white canvas and put a red dot in the middle, or I'm just going to have an entirely black canvas. I saw one at the National Gallery just this past Saturday, just a black canvas. With maybe very subtle gradations of very dark gray to black, but it's no picturing going on. And the artist, I don't believe, is trying to picture. He's saying enough with picturing. I'm interested in color. I'm interested in tone. So not every work of art is mimetic and is trying to picture. I don't think I want to say that. but even the ones where you clearly have a picture, like the Van Gogh self-portrait, it takes some work. I have to make an argument for it as to why that's a story.
Yeah.
And again, it's because it's summing up the actions a person has taken in pursuit of happiness, and it's telling us, did they succeed or did they not? How are they doing? And that's enough of a story.
Along those same lines, we had Larissa Federica on, and she argued that people don't like classical music because they haven't been taught how to properly listen to classical music. With our culture and how we have such a low attention span, and we see a self-portrait, ignore that. I'm just going to go straight to the other thing because there's no action, there's no real story that I can grasp from it after even 2 minutes of trying to analyze it.
Right.
In analyzing a self-portrait or a sculpture that isn't signifying like Bernini's David or something like that,
Right.
Do people need to be taught specifically how to analyze a work of art in order to actually get the story from it?
Yeah, I would agree with Larissa. The analogy that is often used by philosophers of art or critics of art is that we read a work of art. Works of art have a language, and you have to learn that language. You have to learn how to read the piece, or else you'll miss it. So absolutely, and I think that's very clearly the case when it comes to classical music. Mozart has so much engaging melody that we can enjoy it without really knowing too much about the structure. But you get to some other composers, and Dvorak, for example, and it's challenging. It's like this isn't pretty. I'm not getting this. This is a real strain for me. There we need education. Absolutely.
How do you think would be would it be taught in schools? Would it just like how do you teach somebody how to look at a self-portrait and just do some history, do some work on the background of this person's self-portrait? Like,
there's different ways. There's not just one way, but I think it's best if it starts within the family, and so that children get used to enjoying challenging works of art very early, so that they don't feel overwhelmed by them. They just feel, this is art. This is what we've got. So it's not all the Disney Channel and things that are just hyper palatable, but they get used to seeing things that are very, very challenging, and I think that's the best start at any rate. Sure, we can do things in school. I do things on the college level in reading works of art, but hopefully they will have habits by long before they ever get to college. That's the ideal at any rate.
I'm trying to figure out a way to verbalize this, but it seems like there must be a level of intelligibility that is common in all good works of art that anyone could understand, but if you understand the language of art, you could understand more. To me, it seems like if there's a work of art that just the common man, whoever that may be, just can't get anything out of, it seems like it'd be a difficult argument to make that that's art at all. Now, maybe you look at it and say, well, because obviously an artist could look at it and say, well, look at this type of brush that he used. Oh, that color is really hard to blend. Those are things that the normal person wouldn't know, but would learn to appreciate if they studied. But that shouldn't but that almost seems like kind of the cherry on top. But what's the actual, is it a good painting? It seems like sort of a dumb question, but when we were going in Rome and to different art galleries that I've been through, there have been some paintings where I'm like, I want to be open to liking this, but I hate it. Now, maybe if someone told me, well, this artist actually did this and he was going blind, and that's why this part of the painting is this way, I think you could appreciate it more, but I don't know that I would change my opinion on whether it's art. And I think it's, to me, it seems a little bit unconvincing to say, well, you just don't get modern art because you're ignorant.
Right.
And I would be skeptical if the people who are saying that know what that means either. Like, I doubt that they know what that means if it's actually, like we were saying, if it's actually just a red dot.
Yeah.
Now, maybe I think that the problem is there's a huge middle ground, and that middle ground is it a painting? Is it art? Is it not? And there's not really a specific way to kind of decipher and diagram and get to a point where you say, yes, it's art. Circle this box. It's just kind of in this weird, I don't know.
I think you've hit on something hugely important, and I'm very sympathetic to the way you're approaching it. If you think about the greatest pieces of art in every genre of art, the greatest, the masterpieces, my mind always goes to literature because that's what I know best. But think of painting, think of music, think of everything. You'll find that the top works in every genre are totally accessible. Anybody can read Homer. Anybody can read Virgil. Anybody can read Dante. Anybody can read Shakespeare even and get the story. So I think a great work of art should always be on the literal level of the action, what the characters are doing, what they want, what the conflicts are. That should be accessible to just about anyone. If you can't connect with it there, then yeah, I have difficulty calling it a great work of art. In every example I just cited, though, it is a lifetime's work to dig through all the nuances of it. Shakespeare, for example, it's just endless to understand how his language is working, and we could go on and on about that. There are levels that deepen its greatness, but if you can't see a likeness on the literal level, if it doesn't resonate with your life and your experience, you watch Hamlet, yeah, you get the guy's father died. You get that. You understand that what a ghost is and what a ghost means. That's not good if it's your father's ghost. It's a thriller on its literal level, and we connect with it as a thriller. There's a lot more going on in Hamlet than just the thriller, but if you don't connect with it there, I think you're lost. So I think Shakespeare is maybe the best example. The best art is neither high or low. It's neither high culture, like it's elite, only very few people get it, only graduate students learn how to read it, or it's so low it's like a Hallmark movie. The best art is the sweet spot between the two. It's very popular, but it's also incredibly kind of intellectual and challenging. I think all the best works of art in human history hit that sweet spot.
That kind of segues perfectly into what I wanted to talk about, and that is the importance of the Catholic imagination and how we can kind of juxtapose everything that we've been talking about with, like, the salvation story, the Bible. Because I think that the Bible should be immediately accessible to everyone, not only literally, but you can read, especially like the New Testament. You've got parables, things that are fairly easy to understand the story. But obviously, if you know Hebrew, if you know Latin, if you know the different tendencies of the gospel writers, you're going to be able to get a lot more out. And that is a lifetime of research and delving into that more and more.
Exactly.
But that doesn't mean that just the everyday person can't hear, the story of Jesus giving the keys to Peter and understand that authority is being given. That's the base level. But obviously, if you know Hebrew, there's way more that's going on.
Absolutely.
So I'm just curious kind of how the Catholic faith and how, I guess, kind of the biblical story or maybe just kind of Catholic tradition fits in with this idea of art and story.
Yeah, it's great. And I have a chapter on the Catholic imagination. So if it's the case that art imitates human beings in action, questing for their happiness, the Catholic imagination is going to regard that quest, and it's going to ramp it up into the supernatural plane. So now our quest for happiness is not just a quest that's this worldly, but it's going to end with the beatific vision in heaven. And that's going to involve, hell and purgatory. It's going to involve angels. It's going to involve, sin. It's going to involve, so all the facets of the Catholic way of seeing reality come into play once we take into account the Catholic story. And so the Catholic artist, if he or she wants to make a Catholic work, is going to want to picture that story, picture that quest. Mm-hmm. That's what Flannery O'Connor is doing, right? So she wants to picture something that in itself you can't picture, the working of grace. You can't show it. It doesn't have a material dimension. So you have to work it indirectly. And she sees it working through violence, which you can picture. Mm. I can picture the 5 people dead in a ditch and how they got there. And so the Catholic imagination tries to tell the story of the Catholic quest, as I say in the book, it tries to concretize the action of grace. It tries to show how grace is incarnate in human action and in human affairs, sometimes very disturbing human affairs. And there are other aspects of the Catholic imagination. I make the point that the Catholic imagination always favors the small, the humble, because we understand ourselves to be creatures, and a creature is by definition small and humble and dependent and vulnerable and fragile. So it's very typical of the Catholic imagination for a character, for a writer like Tolkien, for example, to develop a hobbit who is literally small, but also, it's true, both Bilbo and Frodo, they're lacking in courage. They're fearful, at least at the beginning of their quest. And the Catholic imagination loves that. It doesn't always depict human beings as literally small, but it shows us in our brokenness, at least our littleness, and it shows us in some way that when we are weak, we are strong. It tries to show the paradox of God working with our weaknesses. It's a long-winded answer, but I'll add, I was talking about the literal understanding of a story earlier. The Catholic imagination understands human action on various levels. So there's always going to be the literal level. I have to understand, okay, Dante, he's a live guy, but he's going into the realm of the dead. That doesn't happen every day. That's cool. That's high concept. I get that. Literal level. But that has a moral dimension, as an allegorical dimension, as an anagogical meaning. It relates to our supernatural destiny in heaven. It has all these layers of meaning, in short. And it may take us a lifetime, just as in your example of Scripture. It may take us a lifetime to work out all those meanings in Dante, just as it may take us a lifetime to work on all the meanings in Scripture. And probably a lifetime is not enough. But that's what a great work of art is. In the Catholic imagination, it will have all those dimensions to it.
I don't want to get off of your book. We can keep talking about it, but since you brought up the concept of a Catholic work of art, you recently announced, I guess it was a little while ago, but it's been more publicized since, that you're writing a play on Karol Wojtyła, his early life, the man who later became John Paul II. So what are you doing in that play that confirms all the things that you've been saying? And what is it, also just kind of behind the scenes, what does it look like to write a full-on play where you're dealing with all the different, not just dialogue, but who's going to come on when, and kind of how you want it to look, and not just who like what are the characters' personalities, but when does a light need to come on, and when does props and things like that, what does all that look like? Yeah,
it's very different from writing a novel where you have total control. You're sort of the god of the universe, and you just create as you see fit. With a play, you can create the script, but then you're so dependent on who the actor is, and the playing space, and the acoustics, and who might get sick on the day of the performance. It can get crazy. I've been blessed in that in March of this year, students in the Christendom Players, our theatrical company, did what's called like a table reading of the play. But usually a table reading is a table reading. The actors are literally sitting at a table and they're just reading. But these actors were very generous. They actually got on their feet on a stage in Killian's at Christendom College, and they acted out the play as best they could with a script in their hands. Though some of them actually did a very impressive amount of memorization for the occasion. That was like an edit come to life. You know, like you can write edits in red pen on some manuscript. This was like it was like a living, breathing edit of the play. And I saw some good things, and I saw some things that needed work. And what was fun, there was an event at Christendom a week ago, 10 days ago, a donor event where I was asked to give a talk on John Paul II. And I presented scenes from my play, 4 scenes with actors. And so I got another chance to see it on its feet, and I was happier with that. But I am trying to... the play, by the way, is going to premiere in November at Christendom, November 8, 9, 10, if you're keeping score. I am trying to put these principles that we've been talking about to work. So I have a character who, in a sense, is small. I have a young man who is living under Nazi occupation, Karol Wojtyła. He wants to be an actor. It's kind of hard to do that when you're under the Nazi jackboot. But he takes his theatrical activities. He and his friends take their theater underground, and they start putting on plays in people's living rooms behind closed curtains. They could be shot at any moment. Even a rehearsal, they could be shot. I just found that inherently dramatic. So I wouldn't say there's too much of a O'Connor-esque flavor to the play, but at least there's a similarity in that I'm trying to show the action of grace, because the point of the play is to show how he discerned a vocation to the priesthood in the midst of all this theatrical activity. And I saw a nice kind of analogy between being an actor on stage and being an actor as priest who is in persona Christi on the altar impersonating Christ in a way. I liked that connection. But the hardest part is the climax, trying to show that moment of insight where grace is at work, and he sees that he has a vocation. It's very hard to do that believably. I've gone at that scene many times. I don't think it's done yet. My wife was just giving me some great ideas about it the other day that I'm still thinking through. It's really hard. It's really
all of
hard.
your best ideas are her ideas.
Absolutely.
That rings
She
true, I
is
think,
my
for
best.
most.
She is my best idea. Did you hear that, honey? You are my best.
So, I guess going a little more full circle then, one of the last chapters in your book is entitled "What is Entertainment?" And I know that's a broad question, but you asked it, so it's not really my broad question. But
Good question, Dr.
Yeah, I think it's a great question personally, but I guess I want to look kind of at like modern day America. Maybe we can even get specific to Catholics. Like, what is entertainment, and what should we be considering good entertainment? What should we be considering bad entertainment? And then I want to maybe explore kind of a realm of entertainment that is maybe neither good nor bad. It just has kind of pros and cons, but not like I would maybe put podcasting in this realm where, is it a waste of time to listen to X or Y podcast? Well, yes, if you're supposed to be doing something else.
Sure.
Potentially, although that could be true for, many different things. But is it bad? Like, if the content you're listening to isn't actually bad, then is it a good waste of time? Like, does it need to be productive? Is it okay to just listen to something and maybe you don't really get anything out of it? It's just something to do. And I think a lot of maybe TV shows could be put in that category as well, where it's like, yeah, are you being challenged? No. Like, is it enjoyable? Yes. Is it funny? Yes. And it's in this middle weird category again of like, maybe it's really not contributing to your overall salvation, but it's a good way to unwind, and it's wholesome.
Right.
Like, it's wholesome.
Yeah,
So we
right.
shouldn't poo-poo on something that's wholesome.
No, I don't think you should.
So yeah, I guess I want to just kind of talk about that a little bit, like just entertainment.
I love this topic. Let's begin with this. When we say the word entertainment, most of the time, I think, take that as a term of disparagement. Like, it's a entertainment. That's a negative thing. That's a waste of time. It's frivolous. It's the Hallmark Channel. It's
It's gladiator games.
It's gladiator. You should really be doing something else, right? I don't agree with that. Not that I don't think that there isn't entertainment that's frivolous, but I think this is why I kind of like Jerry Seinfeld's comments. I think to entertain is a very noble thing, a virtuous thing. St. Thomas Aquinas in the Summa even has a discussion of entertainment. Maybe another story for another day. Mm-hmm. He thought enough of it to want to devote time to it in the Summa. And I think, to go back to my comment about Shakespeare and others, the highest and best art will always attract us and engage us and entertain us on a very basic level, but a very important level. In other words, if we're not entertained by a work of art, yeah, the problem might be with us, but it could be that the problem is with the work of art. Mm-hmm. Works of art, in other words, should be entertaining. They should be entertaining. There's a Catholic novelist from the 20th century, a Scot, Muriel Spark, whose writing I like, and I like what she said once. She said, "My first rule, entertain." And she was kind of a serious, what we think of as sort of a literary novelist, but she said, "My first duty is to entertain." We need art to help us unwind. We need art to relax with on a Friday night. We need art to... I'll draw on Chesterton here, who I talk about in that chapter. We need art to be a treat. He talks about, he says theater, and I'm sure he would say this about all the arts. It should be a treat. Like when you're a kid and your dad says, "I'm taking you to the movies," or "I'm taking you to the circus." That's a treat. A work of art should be like that. It should be entertaining in a very popular, obvious sense. But it should also challenge at the same time. And I call that a paradox in the chapter. But the best, I think Shakespeare is supremely entertaining. It's a rollicking good, Hamlet is a rollicking good thriller, but it also gets at the most important questions that human beings have to deal with. It's very deep, to say the very least. Entertainment should do both those things. So you see, I'm not really distinguishing the best art from entertainment. Those aren't two worlds. It's the same thing. Shakespeare's entertainment, Homer's entertainment, Dante's entertainment. Entertainment is not just, candy floss. It's not just sugar. It's a rollicking good time that is also supremely challenging. That's entertainment.
Do you think that conversation in and of itself can be entertainment? Or is it not really at the level of art because it's not necessarily picturing anything?
Yeah, I would say, a conversation can be enjoyable, pleasurable, deeply satisfying, wonderful. I wouldn't tend to call it entertainment because I associate that with a work of art that's been made. Okay. Yeah.
Because I'm trying to think of it.
Which need to be mimetic, because it could be that the podcast, this isn't mimetic art.
Right.
What we're doing here. Is it entertainment? Actually, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure I would call this entertainment. I would call this human conversation.
Because I feel like for me, like recording a podcast is entertaining because of who we're talking to, like, or at least I'm invested. I don't know if maybe entertainment isn't the right word. And I think it also does challenge me. And I think certain podcasts you listen to, or I think we can go with podcasts, and you're like, I was both very entertained because I was very invested in the guest who was being interviewed, right? They just had Elon Musk on or something.
Right.
I'm entertained, but I also was challenged because he was saying things or referencing things that I don't understand. And so that pushed me to further look into that.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if it rises to the level of actual art.
No, I wouldn't say it does.
Okay. But for like a debate would, right? Or potentially could.
I'm not sure. I mean, I understand, and I'm sure I use entertainment in that sense too. If there's a conversation, say on a podcast, I might say that guest was really entertaining. But if I'm saying that, I'm usually mean there's something artful in the presentation. That person was funny.
Okay.
That person told good stories. There's something kind of artistic about it. My point being, I tend to want to reserve the term entertainment to a work of art, to something that a human being has made that is meant to be enjoyed as art. And so I wouldn't include a podcast in that.
What would you say about sports?
Yeah,
I know you're a soccer fan.
I am.
Like, if you're a neutral, you can see the objective skill of a player or the objective sort of skill of a coach in terms of organizing his team. But even if you're like a fan, you're going through all these different emotions, and you're even, I guess, maybe even being challenged a little bit in terms of anger, sadness, happy, whatever. How would you put sports in terms of entertainment?
Yeah, that's good. You're challenging me because I tend to think I have an easier time calling sports entertainment than a podcast. Okay. And notice that soccer's nickname is the beautiful game. So we like to think of it as an art. And we like to think of sports and athletes as artists, as geniuses. Right. So we use all these metaphors that connect to the world of art and talking about sports. Yeah, I mean, sports are entertaining in the sense that they are they're a leisurely pastime. And maybe that's the sense that we often use entertainment. It's a leisurely pastime. It's not part of the working day. I'm taking time out to do an activity that's free from the workaday. And I think a podcast lands in that category too. None of us have to be here. This is all free, fun activity. It's a leisurely pastime. Sure, it makes sense to extend the word entertainment to that, I think. So, yeah, I may have to revise what I said earlier. I just think maybe kind of the hard sense of entertainment is the show of some kind. Television, theater, even, I would call even the Sistine Chapel ceiling as a show. It's a showing of a work of art. I at least take that myself to be entertainment in sort of the highest sense. But sport is, I have no problem calling that entertainment. Yeah.
Do you think that Broadway is kind of like one of the last real examples of art, like potentially in its highest form, where you have actors that are coming on, there's the show, there's music, there's singing, there's dancing. It seems like, because in a movie, while that may actually be more enjoyable in a sense, because it's easier to see, or there's music that's put together better, the sound effects are better, it's still not happening in real time. Right. And so as enjoyable as movies are and as accessible as they are, it's a fantastic entertainment. Right. Otherwise, we wouldn't have theaters. Right. But it seems like there's kind of a death of live entertainment.
Yes. Yes.
And yet Broadway, like when things are on Broadway, that's a big deal.
It still is
still a big deal.
Right.
It's expensive. Like big shows go for years and years and years.
Yep.
People keep going to, Phantom of the Opera, I think just stopped
I saw
touring
that on Broadway.
after, yeah, right. Like almost anyone who's into Broadway in the last 20 or 30 years has probably seen Phantom of the Opera.
Right.
And maybe multiple times.
Right.
So what is it about live? I wouldn't necessarily say that it has to be a musical, but it does seem like there is something with a musical specifically where you're there and you're like, people are singing, they're dancing, there's lights. Like this is the show. Like, on with the show. Like
it's electric.
And there's kind of an energy there when I've only been to one Broadway show, but there's an energy. You walk in, you're in this beautiful like theater, which also we don't have anymore.
No.
Like some of these theaters in New York are better than 90% of the churches in America. Like they're just beautiful paintings, chandeliers, like very classy. That you can get food, you can get drinks, but yet and everyone's dressed up. Like when I went to one Broadway show, every guy was wearing a suit coat. Like everyone just really put in the effort. And I was like, people at like traditional parishes don't even dress this well for mass.
Oh, absolutely.
So I was like, there's something about this place that's different than pretty much any other type of show, but I don't know what it is. So I'm just curious to your thoughts. Or what does Broadway have that maybe other works of art either don't have or are searching for but can't quite find?
You've hit on one of my favorite topics of all time. So buckle up. No.
Well done.
I think live theater is the highest of the mimetic arts. I think it's the highest and best. And we could get into it. I don't want to get into it now, but it's a side issue whether musical theater is the highest of the highest. But I would at least say that live theater is the best. It has the closest connection to the original religious setting of theater and the arts in general. The arts are kind of they're sort of the child of the religious instinct, and there's still something of that liturgical electricity around a live performance, especially a professional one in a beautiful theater with professional performers as on Broadway. So why is it so special? It goes back to our very first topic of what imitation is. Remember, imitation is trying to represent some reality in the world in a different medium, in the medium of the picture. A theatrical performance does that. It takes human action. That's the reality in the world. But the picture is real flesh and blood human beings moving on a stage, moving right in front of us on a stage, not on a screen, but in 3 dimensions right in front of us. It's as vivid a mimetic picturing as you can get, right? And that is why I think it's so special to be in a live performance. What the arts give us, what the mimetic arts give us, is the real, and I'm using this phrase very deliberately. They give us the real presence of the reality they're trying to depict. So when I look at the Van Gogh self-portrait, Van Gogh is really there. Not in his flesh and blood humanity, but the way he looked, his essay at Beatitude is really there in 2 dimensions in oil on that canvas. There's a reality of Van Gogh that's present. The presence in live theater is just more vivid. It's living, moving, breathing in front of you. The picture moves, it talks, it fights, it kisses, it's amazing. It's right there in front of you. I just don't think anything can beat that. It's a real presence. Body, blood, soul, humanity. Body, blood, soul, humanity. It's liturgical.
So how I think we could all agree that live is better. Live music, depends on the singer, but generally live music is better.
Oh, yeah.
Live theater is better.
Yep.
Why? Because if art is trying to picture reality, why is singing potentially a higher form of art when no one in the real world is walking around literally singing in the rain? Or literally, not that people don't sing, but when you're trying to tell a story like the Phantom of the Opera, or I guess maybe even a better example would be like Les Miserables, right? The entire musical is singing. People don't in real life aren't going around singing sentences to each other. They might break out in song in like kind of a Disney-esque way,
right?
But the entire story is song. So
Right.
why is that higher? Because it doesn't seem to be picturing reality.
Beautiful. Again, it takes us back to the top. What you're noticing is that a musical, it's similar enough to real life that we get these are human beings in action, and Jean Valjean is poor and he's hungry and he steals stuff, and he gets in trouble. We get that, Les Mis. But you're also noticing it's dissimilar to human life. We don't sing our way through our days.
Well, Mark does, but I don't.
Mark does.
All the time.
Well, he's got the voice.
Yeah.
The voice. So that's akin to the exaggeration of the caricaturist or of the comedian. Okay. It's the composer of the musical theater piece is saying, you know what? I'm going to play with this. I'm going to have him sing the whole darn thing. And I know we don't do that in real life, but I'm not aiming at photorealism. I'm aiming at reality. So what the musical theater is it's getting at a reality, or it's getting at an aspect of the reality of the human experience that only can be got at through song.
Okay. So it's almost similar to having a sound like the soundtrack of Braveheart. When these fights were actually going on in Scotland, they're not riding down the hill with bagpipes playing.
Yeah, there's no soundtrack
there's
playing.
There's no soundtrack. But the point
right.
of the soundtrack is not to make it unrealistic. It's to
it's to make the reality hyper intense.
Okay.
Oftentimes, a film soundtrack or a Hallmark movie will just go over the top, and it becomes sappy. It becomes too emotional. But the point of a soundtrack at all, adding music to the moving picture, is to intensify the picturing of human action so that we are in the real presence of those actors and living it with them.
I love this.
Do you think that is seen most in movies? Because it seems like in movies there's things you can't do in real life. Now, real life you can get the dancing real time. That's great. You can get the singing real time. That's awesome. But in movies with editing, you can have things exploding.
Right.
And it looks and almost feels like it's right next to you.
Sure.
But it's not. Or you can have slow motion. That doesn't happen in real life. Not really. In a kind of a dream or memory way maybe, but like so many of Mel Gibson's movies, you see this slow-mo scene and it's not because the scene actually happened in slow motion, but maybe the person remembering it sees it that way. But if nothing else, it intensifies. It intensifies it.
Right.
So do you think an argument could be made that movies do that better than Broadway because it can better intensify those things because of the way that movies are, or no?
I don't think.
I don't know if that makes sense, but
I mean, I blame myself because I got to start on ranking the arts because I put live theater first. But at a certain point, I don't think we need to rank because it's apples and oranges. Each art brings its own tools, its own technology to the table, and is able to create a picture that another art just can't do as well, just because it's a different medium. So yeah, film is so flexible, especially with CGI now. You can have. We talked about Tom Cruise and Ethan Hunt last time, so let's bring them back. Tom Cruise,
cue the music.
But you can jet around the world in 2 hours with Tom Cruise in a movie because it's on film. You could try to do that on stage, but it'd be really hokey. Most plays are a single location and you're there for 2 hours. But there's an advantage. There's an advantage to both, is what I'm saying. Okay. There's an advantage to having the flexibility. There's an advantage to having close-ups in a film that you can't really have on stage. There's an advantage to CGI. There's an advantage to cutting. But then there's an advantage to having the live experience. And for the reasons I gave, I think that makes live theater trump even film, though I rate film very, very highly.
This isn't really a pushback on that, but I am curious, what do you think about live filming musical theater?
Yeah.
To the point where you're getting all of the aspects other than being there in person, which granted is a very important aspect.
Right.
But you also get those close-ups.
Right.
The sound is perfect. There's no one talking. There's
Right.
not a phone next to you.
Right.
Do you think, I think I saw Disney put out a version of Hamilton that was...
I saw it. That's
film.
what I was going to...
Okay, so I haven't seen Hamilton live. I don't know if I don't think I would enjoy it enough to even go see it just because I'm not a musical critic. But I actually did enjoy the movie version without really knowing much about it, because it was very specific to so-and-so singing close up, and then it flashes to so-and-so who's reacting, and then and then you see the lights. So you
very
are
powerful.
getting all of the musical things. In a sense, it felt a little clunky, because you're like, well, if it was a movie, they could have done this way better. Right. But I thought, I don't know, it's interesting.
I think what's happening is that that's almost a new art form. It's a hybrid art form at first. I've seen 2 live, well, both were recorded technically, but they were recorded live performances that were filmed. And I saw Hamilton during the hard COVID lockdown in 2020. And, of course, I'd heard about it for years, didn't know much about it, and had nothing else to do. And so my wife and I sat down, and we loved it.
Yeah.
Loved it. It had the advantage of a film, but it was a film of a live performance. And we saw even earlier that the actor Kenneth Branagh doing Shakespeare's The Winter's Tale in the same kind of thing. That's a lot of fun. It's an approximation. It's what it is. It's a hybrid. It's not live performance. I'd rather be in the theater watching those performances. But if you're in lockdown, you're at home, boy, it's a pretty good second best.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, the last 15 minutes of you talking. I mean, and you did this on purpose, but it's so liturgical. Mm-hmm. And I really love it, because the representation of Christ's sacrifice on the cross, but at the same time, it's the real presence, that what you're getting on at the same time as like a Broadway show. But that, and then Anthony brought up music, and then you bring in Gregorian chant into the liturgy, and you were talking about intensifying just sort of what's going on on stage, on the altar. I don't know. I was just smiling the whole time.
The analogies are really fascinating.
It's fantastic.
That was going to be my follow-up question, is like, how, with everything that you've said, how do we apply that to the Mass without taking away from the Mass, but how do we better understand the Mass through the arts?
Yeah.
Or as art, really.
Or as an art. Like, can we understand the Mass as an art? Because it seems inappropriate to call it entertainment, but I think depending on your definition of entertainment, that could be exactly what it is.
Yeah.
The best of ways.
I mean, liturgy employs the arts. Music, chant, for example, it employs the stained glass windows, statuary, the church architecture itself. All those are arts in service to this liturgical act. It's probably worth thinking of the liturgy itself, and I'm thinking especially of the confection of the sacrament as art. It's probably fruitful to think of that. I think it's more fruitful to think the other way, that art is born out of the liturgy. not originally the Catholic liturgy, but it's good to recall that, say, in the ancient Greek world, that ancient Greek tragedy, ancient Greek comedy, the original live theater in the West came to be as part of a religious festival devoted to the god Dionysus, the wine god. You didn't go to the theater in ancient Greece as we might sort of go to Broadway today. You don't say, "Hey, honey, let's get on Amtrak and go up to New York for the weekend and see Hamilton." You couldn't see theater in ancient Greece whenever you wanted. It wasn't playing all year round. It only played in the context of the Dionysian festival. It was a religious exercise. Now, over time, the stories developed and took on something of a life of their own. They were kind of less obviously connected to the mythology of Dionysus. Nonetheless, you could not put on a play in ancient Greece without the priest of Dionysus sitting front row center. He presided over the performance. So art was something totally different. It was born out of religious practice. That was still true throughout the Roman world and the medieval Christian world, so that there was much Christian theater in the Middle Ages, and into the Renaissance. There were mystery plays, so plays about Old Testament stories, New Testament stories too, perhaps. Shakespeare, as a boy growing up in the late 16th century, would have seen mystery plays, but these are religious plays. There wasn't a secular theater. The arts didn't have a life of their own outside of religion. Today they do, very much. They've just gone their way and left religion behind, and it's part of what I'm fascinated by is what would it be to reimagine the arts resituated, recontextualized within the religious beliefs, ideally the Catholic beliefs of a community? What would theater be? What would music be? What would film be if it was all created and enjoyed within that kind of community? It's an ideal and we can approximate it in certain ways, but it's very hard to make a reality in our time. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, and almost it kind of just makes me think of we have mostly, if not all, a Catholic audience. So Protestant, I guess, services. Mostly, I mean, what we think of is like it becomes entertainment. Like this guy up there is doing this thing that like is for entertainment, and obviously there's this enrichment, but it's mostly this entertainment. So you have people leaving the church because they're like, I'm not getting anything out of it. I'm not getting anything out of Mass. So I'm going to this mega church that is that is giving me more, but it's not enriching in the way that it's supposed to be. So it kind of it is kind of it almost seemed like the difference and the change is the arts were enriching you, and you didn't really have to get anything out of it. It was just enriching, but it's moved to now what can I get out of this thing kind of thing. Yeah, so true.
It's really, our challenge is to see the Mass as, this gets us back. It is worthwhile to see the Mass in a certain respect, not in every respect, but in a certain respect as a picturing, as a mimesis. It's the theodrama, as Bishop Barron likes to call it. It's God's story, salvation history, being played out and reaching a climax in Christ's sacrifice, which becomes really present on the altar. It's a live performance, in the livest sense of live. It's a live performance. It is, but that's we need to be educated into reading the Mass in that way and appreciating, because it doesn't titillate the senses. Sometimes it does, sometimes for not good reasons. But it's not as flashy as another kind of service. And so we have to get used to a very special, quieter, more solemn kind of drama. But it's still a very exciting drama when you really understand what's going on there.
Right.
The hero is dying in front of us and also rising in the very same moment. It's spectacular.
And I feel like Calvary and like the resurrection is such an interesting context to put the Mass in, especially if you think about it, maybe you think about the arts as imitating the Mass in a way, because I think that there are a lot of people, specifically in Catholic circles, who, with the Novus Ordo and with a lot of Vatican II things, there's kind of this movement to like, we need to participate more, we need to be more involved. And while that's maybe coming from a good place, if you think about going to Broadway and saying, I want to be more involved, it's like, no, you don't need to be involved. You just need to be here.
Yeah.
Like the point of you coming, you're going to get everything you need by being here.
Right.
Now, you can clap. That's your participation. So in the Mass, you pray, or maybe there's a few responses.
Right.
But you don't need to be up on the altar doing things. And it seems like this misguided sense of participation in the liturgy, where it's like, if I'm not physically acting, I'm not getting anything out of it. And I think if you put it in the context of a Broadway show, it's like, well, no, you're just there. Like it's good for you just to be there.
Right.
You're going, and maybe not every performance is a hit, or you don't like the singing, or you don't like the actor.
Yeah.
Just like you don't like the choir, you don't like the priest, but it doesn't change the fact that you are still getting something out of it regardless of your participation.
Yeah.
And I think that's just kind of an interesting, I'm sure there's more you could go into on that, but kind of an interesting reflection on what is our role at the Mass.
Yes.
And a lot of it is just being present and not trying to effectuate change, but rather letting the Mass change us.
Yes. And that's not pure. There's a passive moment to that, but it's not purely passive, because you're active, just as with a work of art, you're actively contemplating the reality that's being made present there. That's your job as audience, or as hearers at the Mass, is to contemplate it and to let it transform you.
Which is so interesting, because if you apply the standard of art to the Mass, like is it entertaining, depending on what you mean by that? I think you can say yes. But then also, is it challenging you? It's like, well, that's exactly what Catholicism is. Like if any religion is challenging you, it's Catholicism, because it's saying, take up your cross and follow me. It's saying, take the beam out of your eye. It's saying, all of what Christ is doing is challenging us. It's it's not pat yourself on the back. It's to be perfect.
Right.
Like, okay, well, what bigger challenge is there out there than to be perfect? That's the call.
Love it.
Absolutely. With the Mass too, it's not so much, as I was saying before, it's not so much me like, well, obviously taking in this thing. The Mass is God reaching out to us and like effectuating change in us. So it's and that's why I was that's why I kind of asked about the Mass and art, because it's not only because you're experiencing it, but kind of in kind of the best, or I mean, maybe this is wrong, but with art, there are some pieces of art that really touch certain people, and it's like reaching out to them and their kind of sensibilities or just kind of the way they're thinking, and then kind of again like challenges them, as you were saying, Anthony, too. But like in the Mass, it's God reaching out and if you are prepared for the grace to accept, like
Right,
to accept
right.
that reaching out,
Yep.
then it's more fully realized, really.
Absolutely.
Which is, I don't.
Beautiful.
This is all
Which kind of makes me, I feel like it begs the question, I think we can all agree that Catholics benefit from the arts.
Mm-hmm.
But does that mean that all Catholics need to actively generate art? Like, I think we can all say, having paintings in your house, going to shows, seeing good movies
Right.
is all beneficial to living a good Catholic life.
Yep.
But what about producing those things? Is that
Right.
something that's necessary, or kind of similar to Mass? You need to have a disposition to receive, but receiving is enough. You don't need to. I'm not saying you shouldn't put in effort, but there needs to be a disposition. But going to Mass is the thing that you need to do. But I'm curious with the arts, is that the same, or is kind of in a sense, does everyone need to have that vulnerable aspect of producing and kind of putting forth art for other people?
Yeah, I don't. No, I don't think everyone is called to be an artist in the narrow sense.
Okay.
I'm thinking of St. John Paul the Great's letter to artists, published in 1999. If you haven't read that, it's a pamphlet. You can read it in an hour. It's beautiful. One thing he says is, not everybody's called to be an artist in the narrow sense, but everybody is called to make a masterpiece of their lives. Everybody's called to be a saint, in other words. But it's hard for me to imagine a life that did not include art, because imitation, as Aristotle says, is natural to us. You can't not. A baby will not imitate the parent. It's just natural. For the same impulse leads us to art. We cannot not enjoy works of art. It may be the Hallmark Channel. It may be pretty thin gruel, but every human being will have some art in their lives. But no, we're not all called to make it. But I think it enriches a Catholic life to have knowledge of a repertoire of great works. It just enlarges the soul, enlarges the mind, enlarges our understanding of the human story in so many different ways. We need to be challenged by works of art in our lives. Because art's special. It's really hard. I get it. I just wrote a work of philosophy, but these kind of things are tough. This is a tough sell. That's why you need Peter Criste to blurb your book. When we come home on a Friday night at the end of a long week, it's believe it or not, people are not thinking of curling up with Daniel McInerny's book. They need something that attracts the senses and the emotions and the imagination as much as the mind. And that's what art gives us. So we all are ready for a show on the weekends of some kind. Our nature needs that. The purely philosophical, even the purely theological, it gets us almost. It calls us almost beyond our nature into almost an angelic mode of pure intellect. And we need to go there. You need to go there. Please buy the book. But we can't be there too long. It's so demanding. So I got to unwind. I need something that addresses not the angelic aspect of me, but the embodied spirit. Mm-hmm. And art gets both. It hits me on the sensible material level, and it hits my intellect and will at the same time.
Just one little, I get maybe reflection and maybe just a comment, but of what you said with children and how children can not imitate their parents or their father, and it just struck me how awesome and beautiful that God as Father is the first, the first image that we get, and that like in the Old Testament, and then obviously in the New, like He is. I think one of with Father Mike Schmitz talks about Like, I think that's the main way that he talks about God. Really is like he's a good dad, and like, and then with us being saints, like that's like we're trying to create a masterpiece in our life by imitate. I don't know, that just struck me.
Well, you're hitting on the fact that we imitate in art because we imitate in life. That it's the same impulse. The impulse to imitate in life is actually the more important. Imitating in the moral sphere and ultimately imitating the Father, that is what makes a masterpiece of our lives, and that's what we want to concentrate on the most. The actual making of works of art actually is secondary to all that. We haven't talked about beauty yet.
Oh wow! All right.
Dang it! Oh,
So beauty.
2 hours. Here we go.
I actually was going to bring up beauty kind of in a roundabout sense. I was going to ask if there was anything about art or beauty that in writing this book you realized I've been thinking about this entirely wrong.
Yeah.
Like I always think of beauty. You know, I'm kind of imitating you in this sense, but I always thought about beautiful as being, wow, that's pretty or that's beautiful to look at. But really, maybe there's something deeper to beauty. Like maybe a mother taking care of her child is beautiful. Whereas I was just thinking that painting's beautiful, that building's beautiful, but there's a beauty that's not necessarily visible or something to that extent that in writing this book, you thought, wow, I've either been teaching or thinking about this incorrectly.
Yeah.
I'll just leave that.
There's a lot there.
There is. But I guess more specifically, the question is there anything either regarding art or beauty that you totally either changed your mind on or just in writing this book you thought, wow, I've really haven't been hitting the nail on the head and I need to kind of reorient?
Well, here's the thing that at least I wasn't clear on when I started, and that I worked out in the writing, at least one thing. And it's this. We've all had that experience, let's say, at a liturgy. And I'm thinking of our new chapel at Christendom, and the students are there, and they're a beautiful choir, and they sing the post-communion hymn, and it's transcendent. My wife often says, and I'm sure I've said the same thing, I just felt I was in the presence of God. We tend to think of beauty as a kind of sacramental or even sacrament. That it's a physical thing that grace just pours through. Now, the Mass is maybe not the best example because that is a physical thing in which grace pours through. But sometimes we think of the portrait of Van Gogh or the movie or the sculpture or the piece of music kind of in a sacramental way, as if God is, it's just a portal and God is just pouring through. Now, God can do anything. I'm not trying to limit his activity. But on the what we know on the natural level, I don't think that's right. And that came clear to me. Art doesn't imitate a transcendent, let alone supernatural beauty with the capital B. I think it's best to think of art in just a more craftsman-like way. Art is putting materials together in ways that create three characteristics, as St. Thomas names them, in a way that creates unity or wholeness, harmony between the parts or proportion, and a radiance, both a sensible and intelligible radiance. If a work has those three qualities, it's beautiful. That doesn't mean we've been transported into the next life. It's not a sacrament. I wouldn't even say the Sistine ceiling chapel, which depicts God the Father creating, it's not a sacrament. It's not even sacramental. It's just a picture. It's a very, very good picture, but it's just a picture telling the story of creation. We call it beautiful because the way that Michelangelo structured the painting, the way he crafted it, it has characteristics as a thing. It has unity, it has proportion, it has radiance. the beauty is in the physical thing, not in the next world, if that makes sense.
Does that contradict beauty being in the eye of the beholder, or does that?
Yes, it does.
Okay, why is that?
I mean, in one sense it does, because it says that beauty is not in your head. Beauty is not in your consciousness. Beauty is not in your perceptions. Beauty's in the thing. Beauty is in the paint on that ceiling. You may be all over the place. You may be a 9-year-old kid who's tired and just wants gelato, and you could care less about what's painted on that ceiling, and you just walk through. It doesn't mean it's not beautiful, because the beauty is not in here, it's up there. Now, in another sense, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, because somebody has to appreciate the picturing, right? Somebody has to see the wholeness and the proportion and the radiance. So you need an audience, but the audience doesn't create the beauty.
Okay. Is
Doesn't.
that universal? Because it seems like God would be beautiful whether he had creation to perceive that or not. Whereas a physical object could be beautiful, but if no one's there to see it, it doesn't really matter.
Oh, well, I'm not saying that let's say Michelangelo painted the ceiling and for some reason the chapel was sealed off and no one ever saw it. That doesn't mean it's not beautiful just because there's no one there.
Okay,
It's just typically you need an audience to register the beauty.
Okay.
The beauty needs to be appreciated by somebody. But the source of the beauty is not in us. It's in that ordering of the materials that Michelangelo did.
How does art and beauty kind of work together? Because I think that people would use those words somewhat interchangeably. That's a great work of art. Wow, that's beautiful. Wow, that thing you did is very, very artistic. Wow, that thing is very beautiful.
Sure.
Maybe it's a misunderstanding of what the words actually mean, but I think it's because both of them have so much in common. So what is the difference between something that's art and that's beautiful?
Well, a great work of art is beautiful. What makes it great is that it has those qualities, those three qualities that I mentioned. So they go together. It's a package deal. You don't have a great work of art that's not beautiful. Mm-hmm. In other words, because again, what makes it great is its wholeness, its proportion, its radiance. I'm using those three terms. It's still very general and very vague. What we would have to do to make those more vivid is we'd have to take a particular work of art and we'd have to really get into the details. Like what if we're talking about Dante, if we're talking about this Van Gogh self-portrait, if we're talking about this piece of music, what is it that makes it whole? What is the harmony between the parts? What is its rate? We'd have to really dig into the details to find out where it's beautiful. But in doing that, it's like we would be taking apart an engine of a car. You know, we would be dealing with the parts of a thing. We would not be in some kind of fairyland. Sometimes we make beauty too mystical, and I try to counteract that.
Why do you think that we make it mystical? Is that just because it's hard to define, or like in the Catholic tradition, it's a transcendental, so it kind of already is in this category of
yes.
I can't really understand this?
It's both those things and a third, that we know that God himself is beautiful with a capital B. So all of those reasons that you just gave, they take us out of this world. So we think beauty is out there somewhere, and somehow the work of art kind of taps into that. It's a conduit, or I don't have such a romantic view of art. Now, all that's true. God is beautiful, and there is a transcendental beauty. But a piece of art, the painting hanging on the wall, what makes it beautiful is there on the canvas. It's the arrangement of the colors and the shapes on the canvas that makes it beautiful. It's, in one sense, we don't want to go to another world. We want to look at the canvas.
In that way, is art sort of like the handmaid to beauty? Because it seems like you look at a sunset and you'd say that's beautiful, and you could look at a painting of a sunset and say that's beautiful, while also recognizing this painting of the sunset isn't the real thing. Both are beautiful,
right,
but the actual sunset is the thing. Whatever's being pictured is the art is trying to portray the beauty.
Yeah. That's beautiful, because that takes us again back to the very top. The picture, what is being pictured is always the point. It's our contemplation and our delight in what is being pictured. In your example, the sunset, the real sunset. That's ultimately what the art is for, is to help us see that and delight in that in a freshened way. Doesn't mean we can then throw away the painting, because we like how the artist depicted that and we like to enjoy that for its own sake. But ultimately, it's for the reality being pictured.
Do you think that beauty more so than art is universal? Because I could see people saying, well, I like this painting of a sunset more than that painting, because this one has these techniques and this one has those techniques.
Right.
But both of those people would agree that the actual sunset is beautiful, in the same way that you would look at a baby and everyone would agree that that baby is cute or beautiful, whereas a picture or a painting of that baby may or may not be beautiful depending on who's looking at it.
Sure.
It's almost seems like art is more subjective and beauty is more universal.
There is room, I wouldn't quite put it that way, but I would agree that there is room for taste or preference when it comes to work of art. And that does no violence to beauty or art having an objective meaning. It's fine if you enjoy reading classical mysteries and I enjoy reading, Dante. It doesn't mean that art is subjective or beauty is subjective. There's room for preference. We're different people. And maybe you can learn to appreciate Dante more, and I can learn to appreciate the mystery more. So there's room for preference, I think, in all this.
What's this? I'm just thinking about this in my head right now.
The best kind of thinking.
Yeah, well, sometimes. For some reason, whenever I think of beauty, I think of much more of a visual thing. So when I think of a movie or something, I don't think, wow, that dialogue was really beautiful. I think that cinematography was beautiful.
Right.
Is there a sense as to where, I mean, men were visual creatures. Is there a sense that visual is always gonna trump sort of our intellect?
Well, when we think about beauty, it makes perfect sense that the perception of the eye is going to be kind of home base, because it is the sense that makes the most distinctions. It's the most intellectual of our senses. And so we're going to associate the beauty, which is it's an intellectual phenomenon in many ways. We're going to associate that with eyesight more than with smell, for example. When St. Thomas, in one text I can't remember, in talking about radiance, that third characteristic of beauty, sometimes, or in this text, he just gives the example of color. What is radiance? It's just bright color, which appeals to the eye. So we start there. We start with what we perceive with the eye when we're trying to get a handle on the beautiful. But I do think a piece of writing can be beautiful. I do believe really any work of art can be beautiful as it appeals to the senses, even apart from the eye.
When I think of writing, however, I'm just imagining what's going on, which again is like it's in reality, and so you're kind of able to sort of visualize it at the same time.
Right.
With music, some people can visualize music, but sometimes it's just kind of, I don't know.
Yeah, but keep in mind, the beauty is not what you're visualizing in your head. The beauty is in the thing.
Right.
So when I think of a beautiful piece of writing, I'm thinking of the sentence structure. I'm thinking of the metaphor that writer used, or whatever rhetorical device the writer used in the sentence. That's where the beauty resides. Or in music, it's in the notes.
Okay.
The beauty is in the structure of the notes. It's not... What's happening in you is simply the appreciation of what's outside of you.
It seems to me that people would categorize music as beautiful maybe more than other things, and I'm wondering, I don't know if this is true, but just based on those three things, those three kind of qualifications that Aquinas lays out for beauty, I'm wondering if it's because music is the easiest area to apply to radiance. So like if you're reading a beautiful script or a beautiful book, you might say, okay, it's beautiful in itself, it's proportional, but I don't really get the radiance. Like, yeah, maybe the words they're using are colorful or it's descriptive. I'm getting kind of a phantasm of sorts. Whereas you have music and you've got all these different parts and the harmonies. That's like, boom, that's radiant.
Right.
And I'm wondering if...
I think there's some...
I don't know if that... I don't really know how to...
Music
exactly
is
outline
tricky.
what I'm saying, but
music is really true. I think what you say is true. I just think music is maybe the most mysterious of all the arts because first of all, it doesn't hit the eye; it hits the ear, which is strange enough. And then, especially when you think of music not associated in a very literal way with a story, so we're not talking about Hamilton. We're talking about Mozart's 40th or whatever, pure sound. How that is picturing, how that is storytelling, how that is beautiful, all those questions we've been talking about become very, much more difficult to think through because you just have sound. You don't have... We're looking for the likeness to the real, because again, the mimesis has to have some dimension of likeness, and it's like, well, this is just sound. I can't see anything that looks like my reality, but yet it's moving me. That's a mysterious thing. It's late in the day. I don't know if we can... I will just say this. I do argue in the book that music is mimetic, and what it is picturing is, in short, the internal existential experience of what it feels like to quest for happiness.
So is that... I feel like the only two, like the main two categories that we can kind of wrap our minds around in terms of eternity is you have the beatific vision, so you see God, which is not easy to comprehend, but sort of easy to put in a category because you just think of what's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen times infinity, right? But then the only really, I mean, I guess we also have the banquet feast, but to me, the other big category is the choirs of angels.
Right.
So you kind of combine, okay, whatever seeing God is like, and then hearing the best choir / music I've ever heard.
Right.
Sounds pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Which is funny because you mentioned going to mass and hearing the choir and just feeling like, wow, this is heavenly.
Right.
So you combine that with also not just seeing the physical fallen world around you, but whatever vision you're seeing is the divine Godhead. Sounds pretty good. And then you add in feasting, like,
right. And Dante
I'm not
even has,
complaining, you know?
Dante even has the blessed in heaven dancing. So you throw another art on top of all that. So
Dante was an advocate for Broadway. That's really what you're saying.
That's right. You want a musical.
I don't want to keep you too long. So before we go, I want to quickly just let anyone who's listening know how can they, if they want to get in touch with you or if they want to follow what you're doing. We kind of already went over this last time, but it's been a while. So what's the best place to follow you on? Instagram, your blog? How do we get your books? All of that.
Okay, let's begin with the book we've been talking about, Beauty and Imitation. You can find that at the Word on Fire bookstore. You can find it on Amazon, probably other online booksellers as well, but those are the two main ones I know. I also have a novel, The Good Death of Kate Montclair. You can find that at Chrism Press, my publisher. You can find that on Amazon as well. My main online hangout, though, is on Substack. I have a newsletter there called the Comic Muse. You can search on danielmcinerny.substack.com and find me there. Just search on the Comic Muse. You'll find me. You can subscribe for free. I do have an Instagram. What is my address on it? I think it's Daniel McInerny _ the Comic Muse.
I think so.
Something like that. I'm on Facebook too. And so you can find me there just under my name. So that's me. Would love to be in touch with you. So come
Awesome.
on over.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Dr. McInerny, thanks for coming on.
Oh gosh. Thank you.
I feel like every time we have you on, it's like, all right, we're going to talk for 3 hours.
Yeah,
and then at the end of it, we're going to be like, wow, we just brushed the surface.
Yeah.
It's always a good
It is
feeling.
true.
And
it is true.
I hope that everyone enjoyed this and then goes and follows all of your work. We'll link as many things as we can. You have a lot of resources available. So hopefully people keep reading and keep watching movies and keep watching Broadway shows. And just keep thinking about the big picture questions that you're trying to kind of tackle in this book.
Thank you.
I think if anyone reads this book and is challenged, then it's a work of art. So
Thank you.
this is Doing Virtue.
Catholic Podcast.
Virtue is what we do.
Cheers. Thanks for
Gentlemen,
tuning in, everyone.
Thank you.